following on the series of regional colloquia that we have in the ISA been running for the last 2 years. The purpose of the integrative colloquium, the purpose of the regional colloquia was to have discussions in various parts of the world on the basic issues which we think, basic intellectual issues which we hope will inform the 1998 Congress in Montreal. That is a look backward at the heritage of sociology and a look forward at the future of sociology and social sciences in general in the 21st century. By now, we have had 10 such regional colloquia. In addition, we have a volume that will discuss the same problems from the point of view of feminism. There are therefore 11 volumes. You have had the introductions to almost all of these volumes to read, and I trust that you have read them, and we are now going to discuss them over the next 2 days. Our format, you know. Our format is that each 2 hours will be devoted to a particular theme that seemed to be central to the discussion as they occurred in different parts of the world. And I've asked various people simply to introduce very briefly these themes and then for the rest of us to discuss. I think it would help, since everyone doesn't know everyone else at this point, that the first time you speak, at least, you identify yourself, perhaps your country, and we take it from there. So, yes, I have it. Thank you. The program is being distributed. We are not quite all here. At the very last minute, Piotr Stomka, who organized and edited the volume on East Central Europe, sent us a message that he is ill and cannot come to this meeting. Anna Almeida, who organized the Portuguese-speaking world colloquium, was unable to come. We are awaiting momentarily Joran Terborn from the Nordic countries, and 1 or 2 of the co-editors were unable to come, but we are mostly here, and we are a good group. And we shall start this afternoon with a general overview. So I shall say a few words. Marcel Fournier, who is acting on behalf of the local organizing committee as the host for this particular conference and has played a role in organizing it, will say a few words. Maria Ruth Moran, who is the general editor of the series of volumes and has been in touch with all of you, will say a few words, and then the discussion will be open. So let me start. It seems to me, both from thinking about the problem and from reading the various volumes, that the issue is coordinating our understanding of what is happening, what has been happening, and what is happening, and what possibly will be happening in the world system as a whole over the last 2 centuries, and what has been happening, what is happening, and what possibly will be happening in the world of social analysis of the world. And the two are linked, but they're not identical. We are all aware that social sciences emerged basically in the 19th century, social science as we know it today, and we have long said that this was a response to a transformed world system, the beginning of important industrial zones within it, the transformations of the world following the French Revolution, everything that we have sometimes summed up in the term modernity. And social science was an attempt to understand what was going on and perhaps to control what was going on, but in any case to understand what was going on. We also are aware that although the 19th century was the time of the origins of the the social sciences. In many ways, what we call mainstream sociology, whatever that may mean exactly, is really something that was crafted largely in the period after the Second World War, in the period roughly between 1945 and 1970, which is quite recent, but we have to put that into a particular context of the world as we knew it then, a world dominated by the Cold War, a world in which the United States was the single strongest power, but also the single strongest institutional force within sociology as a discipline, just numerically and in terms of influence. And we all know that in the last 20-25 years, the world has changed radically from the world of 1945 to 1970. We had the World Revolution of 1968. We had the emergence of major movements which were always there, but never in the strength that they assumed from the 70s on, the women's movements, the movements of various kinds of racial and ethnic identity groups. And then, of course, we know that the end of the 80s, the early 90s, where there were further changes, the collapse of the communisms in East Central Europe, such that many people, not everyone, talks of us being in a postmodern world. So the problem we have to ask ourselves is how much the changes in the real world are a cause of, or should be a cause of, a change in the way we view the real world. And there are, I hope, I expect, quite contradictory opinions, perhaps in this room, but certainly in the wider world. And that, it seems to me, is the heart of what we need to discuss. What's happening in the real world, what impact that has on how we think about the real world, how we ought to think about the real world, how we are likely to be thinking about the real world in the years to come. And that poses questions not only about the real world, but about the nature of the structures of knowledge. And so it raises questions about the pertinence, legitimacy, and possibility of the distinctions among the social sciences that were created in the late 19th century and the degree to which they are still relevant and likely to remain in force as we move into the 21st century. I think those are the issues. That's all at this point that I have to say on this. I would turn the floor over now to M. Fournier.
Thank you very much. All this process of reflection and discussion seems to me important, but it is a difficult work. And is a synthesis of all these regional seminars possible? I don't know. I will not try to present a synthesis of all this discussion. I just got the introductions, the different introductions, a few days ago. I was in Europe, and I will only ask a question. I think it seems to be important at this time to know what are the most important questions after this process. And I have 3 or 4 kinds of questions. The first one is, what are the new sociological topics? Is it tradition and modernity, race, ethnicity, democracy and welfare state, etc., etc. Another kind of question is, what are the theoretical orientation, the new trend in sociological theory? So, yes, Stromka is not here. Should be a good thing to discuss with him all these questions. But where is Marx in your papers? Is there a comeback to Weber? And where is the general sociology? I have some difficulty to find this trend in all your introduction. Where is the general sociology? The distinctions in between macro and micro sociology, the question of structure and agency, the question of culture. What is the place of cultural studies, of sociological or cultural sociology? One question is about the notion of globalization. It's really important in many of your papers. Globalization and sometimes post-modernity. Sometimes only we will find the notion of post-modernity. And what about the idea of convergence between all the different societies? Do you see convergence or not in the future of our societies? The third one, it's about the general orientation of sociology. Is there only an international sociology, or are there many regional sociologies? It's an important question. What is the situation of what is the intellectual dependency of many of our regional or local sociology? Is it possible to have national sociologies? Is it possible also, I found this notion, to have regional theories? It seems bizarre to find this notion of regional theories. Is it possible to have a theory only for one country or for one region in the world? And the last series of questions is about the role of the social scientists. What are their social responsibilities? And we will find this kind of question in few of your papers. Not many, but I think we have to discuss this question. What are the social responsibility of sociologists? So that's some few questions, but it's important at this time to try to find not a response to all of this question, but if you read your introduction, you will find some of this question. But is it possible altogether to give a response and to try to describe the global situation of sociology in the world, not of the international sociology, but what is the actual and the future of the sociology in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maria Luz Moran.
Thank you, Manuel. Well, I think that we have today to discuss some of the main themes raised by Emmanuel and Marcel's intervention. Therefore, I want to remind to you some of the concrete and more practical results of this project, of Emmanuel's project. I usually don't like quantitative sociology, but in this case I would like to present some of the data of our meeting. As you know, I have been a privileged participant and observer to the 10 conferences. First of all, I want to say that I have survived. I was not sure. I don't know if I'm going, although I am not sure if I am going to survive the process of editing of the book.
Sure.
I don't know, but well, we've had 10 meetings in 16 months, less than 1 year and a half. The first meeting was held in South Africa in July '96, and the last one took place 2 weeks ago in Lisbon. This is an impressive result, taking into account the conditions in which Emmanuel presented his projects. In the first place, as you all know, the ISA has a limited financial support. We only had 2 years ago the UNESCO foundings. The UNESCO foundings that we used to pay the travels of the outside participants to the conferences. And we have to recognize that it has been your efforts, the efforts of the local organizers, which have made possible the accomplishment of the regional conferences project. Second, we are aware of the difficulties in connecting people in many regions, the difficulties that you've had in connecting and finding people in many regions, and this has to do, obviously, in the first place, with the difficulties of working with the concept of region in some parts or regions of the world. This is a preoccupation that appears in some of your introduction, for example, in Sukmun's introduction. I probably raised in your papers and a question that probably will appear in our discussion. It seems to me that in this level the meetings have had positive effects, not only in those well-established regional communities of social scientists, Arab, Latin America, Northern Europe, but above all in those in which the regional definition of a sociological community is still problematic. I only want to present two examples. We have now the project of creating a South Asian Sociological Association after our meeting in Mumbai. And in the last meeting, one of the results of the meeting was a project of creating a common data bank between Brazil and Portugal, because it's surprising, or it was surprising to me, that Brazil, which is very well established in Latin America sociological community, has very few links with the Portuguese world. We have to recognize that there have been no important problems in the meetings. I think that we all can be satisfied with the participation of sociologists from nearly all the countries included in each region. Of course, we've had minor problems of attendance that have been solved in many cases, including the contributions of the non-participants in the volumes. We have to be satisfied also with the work we've done during the meetings. We've had in almost every meeting a high level of discussion. It seems to me that the organizers have made an effort in presenting not only different subjects that could represent the sociological work in the region, but also different perspectives or views. The central theme of the Congress, heritage, challenge, etc., has been also in the core of the meetings. I am satisfied with the contribution of the participants from outside the region. I think it has been a positive one. And it is clear in the introduction to the volumes that we've closely followed the title of the Gulbenkian's report. That is to say, we've had a high percentage of non-sociologists including in our discussions, historians, anthropologists, etc. Coming to the last stage of our project, most of the organizers have kept the deadline more or less, but I have already finished the first revision of 7 volumes. I have 2 more with practical problems. We cannot open the diskettes. I think that all this technological progress of computers is still insufficient for our work, working from different parts of the world. I think that the contents of the volumes are above the random level of this kind of evaluation. No, it's true. You know, when you put together different people on different subjects. And I think that we've solved most of our format problems. We've tried to make short, little, and cheap volumes, and everything is more or less under control. Last but not least, having carefully read your introductions, first I have had to read them in a very mechanic way, looking for mistakes and errors, etc. I have to say that the only person that has followed one by one the format laws was Jacques Cohen, who is a Swiss. the only one. Everyone has produced some kind of, personal print in his or her style. Well, I cannot resist the opportunity of making a general comment on the papers. I think we have there is a general feeling of crisis. Perhaps it's just the millenarism, At the end of the century, we have every end of the century from, I don't know, the 10th or the 9th century keeps having this feeling of the end of the millennium. This sense of, or feeling, of crisis affects the models and theories of sociological understanding of what's going on in our world, and it also affects the methodology, quantitative versus qualitative. But it also affects all the dimension of our work as social scientists that are not perhaps so important, but that appear in almost every introduction. Who makes our agendas of research? That's a point which has been raised in, I don't know, perhaps three-quarters of the introduction. The importance of thinking about or on the role of NGOs, institutions, and foundings of our research. A general concern of the decrease of importance or the decrease of weight of social sciences in our academic institutions, our structure, our universities. For example, the Portuguese meeting, we had a very interesting discussion on the kind of founding that the European Union is giving and to which fields of research. Social sciences have disappeared in the last program of research of the European Union. But also there is a concern on the decrease of importance of teaching of social sciences. And this was a problem that appeared very strongly, I remember, in the Latin America meeting in Venezuela, in Colloque Montreal. But also in South Asia, in Fartha's paper, there is this concern of teaching. And a feeling that in spite of the huge development of communication technologies in the last decades, our nets of communication are narrowing. I've become an expert in reading quotes, your quotations, and I can assure you that we quote no more than 9 or 10 publishing companies. I want to finish with an example. When I studied sociology in Madrid, in Spain, and I was in my second year when Franco died and the political transition began, it was impossible to study any field in the social sciences without reading the Latin American editions, Mexican, Brazilians, Argentinian, or the French one. And we had in Madrid at least 3 bookshops of Latin American publishing companies. Now we have one, and it's going to close in next year. So, well, this is one of the points that have raised my attention. Thank you.
All right. The floor is open. Well, let me pick up and throw out to you one of the things that Maria Ruth pointed to. She said there is a sense of crisis. Is there a crisis? In the world or in the social sciences, it's for you to choose which to answer. Yes, Heinz.
Well,
Heinz Sonntag.
Somebody has to begin. Heinz Sonntag from Caracas in Venezuela. This question of the crisis, I think it's a very important one. The last book of Terence Hopkins, Manuel Wallerstein, and others on transition, there is a particular emphasis on the concept of crisis, with which I don't agree. I say this because I think it's important. Particularly in Immanuel's introductory remarks to this book, he speaks of crisis only as a moment in which the social structure and the knowledge on the social structure changes completely, radically. I think this is a too narrow sense of crisis, because it makes it impossible to think of the development of the evolution, let's say, of social sciences as a constant process of crisis which produces other crises, which produce other crises, and so on and so on and so on. There is a vicious circle, or a virtuous circle of continuous crisis, each of which produces new forms of knowledge, new methods of getting this knowledge, and new, let's say, modes of production of knowledge on the real social world. If you limit crisis only to this great moment in which everything changes, the social reality is transformed radically in all its forms, and the social knowledge on the social reality is equally transformed radically, then you have perhaps one or two crises in all the evolution of social thinking from the beginning of it in the second or third millennium before Anno Domini, and the end of this millennium. So I would it's just a provocation. I wonder what my colleagues think about that, and there are some other questions on which I would return in a later contribution.
Does anyone feel provoked? R.BRICENO-LEON.
Je vais casser l'unanimité anglo-saxonne et introduire quand même une certaine diversité et introduire la crise. La crise, c'est-à-dire la plainte. En réalité, ce que j'ai trouvé dans presque tous les papiers, c'est une plainte d'identité. Avant, je croyais qu'il n'y a de similitude nette avec les Arabes que les femmes. Et j'ai trouvé que presque tous les papiers d'introduction ont la même plainte de dire qu'est-ce que nous sommes, comment nous sommes différents, cette demande de différentes régions, d'Amérique latine, d'Asie, d'Afrique du Sud. Le discours que je croyais spécifiquement arabe et qui a dominé notre réunion à Tunis sur la théorie occidentale, les concepts occidentaux, je trouvais que peut-être avec moins d'agressivité qu'en Tunisie, c'est la même plainte dans presque tous les papiers, et je crois que ça c'est un signe de crise ou de bonne santé. Pour moi c'est un signe de bonne santé. les Arabes ne sont pas simplement comme les femmes, mais toutes les régions actuellement ont un discours comparable à celui des mouvements féministes. Et si notre contribution peut avancer, c'est de trouver quels sont les mécanismes qui produisent cette similitude entre des latino-américains, des asiatiques, des africains, des femmes et des arabes. Et qui n'a pas été programmé au départ par Emmanuel.
Yes, please.
Je voudrais juste, au Wederni de l'Université de Tunis, ajouter une remarque à mon collègue Zral. Moi, ce qui m'a attiré, c'est la régionalisation qui a été effectuée par l'AIS. Il y a 9 régions, plus la région des femmes. Et analyser cette régionalisation déjà est très intéressant. Parce que dans la répartition faite par l'AIS, déjà pour le concept de colloques régionaux, il y a eu quand même un balancement entre 2 critères. Un critère tout à fait culturel, la langue, comme le colloque portugais, le colloque arabe, la langue et la culture, et quelquefois un critère géopolitique. Il n'y a que ces 2 critères pour discerner entre les régions dans lesquelles ont été organisés ces colloques. Ce qui fait qu'il y a eu peut-être une réaction des participants, une réaction parce qu'ils se sont trouvés dans une grille identitaire. Et le discours identitaire a été le discours qui a prévalu en lisant les... Moi, je n'ai lu que les introductions que vous avez envoyées, c'est-à-dire 7 ou 8, pas toutes, 7, c'est ça, et plus la nôtre. Donc, une réaction à une image, un miroir, qui est l'AIS, un miroir bien régionalisé. Donc, le Moran tout à l'heure avait soulevé l'international, le régional, cette ambiguïté entre le positionnement du discours sociologique. Je crois qu'il y a quelque chose à revoir un peu dans la situation du sociologue par rapport à la sociologie ou par rapport aux sociétés. Et nous avons plus tendance à situer le sociologue par rapport à des sociétés et non pas par rapport à une science, la sociologie. Et ça, c'est une question quand même importante.
Probably this also not only a problem of identity. Roberto Briceno-LEON from Venezuela. It's not only a problem of identity in the persons, in the individuals, but also in the political systems and in society and in some ideas of conception of the society. 3 years ago I was invited for Cuban University to attend to a seminar there, and somebody met me at the airport. Said, "Are you coming to the meeting of the businessmen of the Arab world in Cuba?" And Cuba is, for me, it was a surprise at the meeting of businessmen in Cuba. Whereas, what is happening in Cuba as a political system, or in China? And what is the idea of leftists and socialists now? So it's a crisis of the concepts that we identify not only us as persons or groups or social classes, but also as political systems. And probably this is a problem of changing in the society and changing our approach and our tools for to capture this reality.
Yes, Arthur Mukherjee from India.
Well, there are several levels at which one can discuss the idea of crisis in sociology or social sciences. And I'm going to just emphasize one of these right now. I think others will be discussed in course of time. I think that particularly in the South Asian region, and I presume in much of the developing world, we are facing a very, very strong crisis in the social sciences and sociology in particular. And the basic reason, I think, is that we are slowly moving out of the endogenous structures of knowledge which were active earlier, whether during the nationalist phase, producing creative social science and sociology, or even after, when it engaged through, as Professor Wallerstein says, through the prism of their regional identities or regional understandings of the so-called worldwide sociology or social science. Now we have reached a stage where social science is getting constructed externally. The priorities are being defined by priorities not necessarily of the country or the region, but of priorities of interests outside the regions and the countries. And in a sense, I think Emmanuel's concept of core and periphery at this level becomes also very important to understand. There are any number of projects and funds with lots of money at the globalized level which are available for sponsored research. They pick up on institutions and then they get drawn into it. So at one level, the agenda, the priorities, what is real problem, where to get at it, how to look at it, the theoretical framework, they tend to come or get influenced by externally constructed priorities. On the other hand, the resources for social science within these countries and regions are shrinking. Thanks to liberalization, priorities are different. The reward systems within the disciplines don't compare as well with, let us say, a management or other spheres where a social scientist can go. As a result, there is a flight of talent from scholarship and academics into management and so on and so forth, which the liberalization process has generated. Thirdly, the government finances, for instance, the Indian Council of Social Science Research in India, which earlier used to finance a lot of social science research based on the merits of problems that were proposed as research proposals, are languishing. They're not even important to the government. As a result, the production of relevant social science knowledge is shrinking. It's shrinking, and it is a crisis not only for sociology and social sciences, it is becoming a crisis for these countries and for these regions, because these vacuums where knowledge is not being produced are being filled up by politics. It's the politician which is constructing knowledge, which is constructing situations, which are even constructing falsehoods, and through media and other making them appear as real. And therefore we have, in this sense, a very, very difficult phase through which we are moving in social sciences. And I don't know, I find a little commonality here with Arisitas and myself. This is something where I think we have to give thought as to, no matter who produces what kind of knowledge through what orientation is not the problem. Parallel paradigms galore, yes, let them be side by side till we reach more consensus, as Professor Wallerstein says. But the production of knowledge itself is being affected at the sources, and that is where I think we have a crisis.
Linda Christensen.
I guess I want to say a couple of things. I want to first of all tell you a story. I was at the United Nations talking to some feminists internationally. There were people from India, from Latin America, from Asia, and from North America. And we were presenting to the World Summit for Social Development, some meetings around the preparatory meetings for that. And the North Americans and the Canadians defined it as a crisis. And the Indian said, well, it would have been a crisis 10 years ago. We've done that. We're moving on. They seem to correspond with when the society was undergoing version of structural adjustment. And obviously that's happening right now in Canada, and so we are defining it as, quote, a crisis. And so I think there are some parallels then with social sciences. I defined the crisis in sociology in the early 70s, when I found that the theory simply didn't work for me as a feminist in any way, shape, or form. And so I guess I'm less apt to define it as a crisis now, because I think that there is a developing feminist scholarship that is beginning to make some changes. And it struck me as an interesting parallel if we sort of look at those two features. I guess the third thing I want to say is politically, I can't decide whether we should say it's a crisis or not. Part of me and part of the discussions I've been in says, don't let them say there's no alternative. Basically argue that there isn't a crisis, that the crisis is in your mind, that it's basically, that if we say there are many alternatives, that is a far stronger position to hold politically, intellectually. On the other hand, MAI is being negotiated at the present time, the Multilateral Agreement on Investment, where basically nation-states of the world are giving up their power to corporate, to corporations. They're basically allowing corporations to sue national governments. That strikes me as a structural transformation, which is, and that's the part that wants to say, yes, there is a crisis, and we have to work on it. So, as I say, I think it depends, obviously, in this particular case, on how we want to define the word crisis, and politically what is the most useful way of moving ahead. And perhaps what we need to do at this point is invent a whole bunch of other ways of defining crisis which are more useful sociologically.
Personally, I spent a large portion of my intellectual life arguing against people crying out there is a crisis, because obviously new things are happening at every moment, and they create various kinds of tensions, and people say that's a crisis. And I keep saying, no, but you've got to see that really there are underlying structures, and they're maintaining themselves, and these are minor adjustment mechanisms. And that's why Heinz, the definition in that book, we were trying to distinguish between the constant, eternal adjustments which exist in any system and which always take the form of some acute conflict, which is then handled in one way or another so that the acuteness seems to go down. And the times which are relatively rare, in which those adjustment mechanisms no longer work for whatever reason, and therefore the system is into a much more fundamental historical choice. In that book we were arguing that both the world system and the world of knowledge was at that point. But I think it is useful, if you want to call it small crisis and big crisis, or adjustment and crisis, or anything, to maintain a kind of distinction between the eternal problematics of any ongoing social system, which always take the form of this kind of, and the rare, because we have to remember all our historical systems have gone on for a long time, but none of them have gone on forever. They've all historically come to ends at various points, and they've had real crises which resulted in something else, some fundamental changes occurring. And I think it's worth bearing that distinction in mind, whether we're at that point now in our current historical system, whether we're at that point in the world of knowledge, is in fact one of the things that we are debating. Ari Sitas from South Africa.
Thanks. I think we need to speak about three crises. The first is a very practical one, as being reflected here. The crisis is that, for instance, in Southern Africa, there are about 200 people who constitute the sociological community between Mozambique, Angola, Zimbabwe, Zambia, South Africa, are increasingly incapable of articulating research agendas that are not seen as trivial. In other words, that no practical knowledge, experience, and so on is enough to guarantee that those are legitimate, fundable, important, or defining. And that is an enormous change from in the last 15 years. From a situation where all those questions were listened to a kind of global deafness. That is the practical. Second one, I think conceptually something unique has happened. And it's very difficult, and it manifests itself in the actual pedagogic situation with an emerging and student population in South Africa, a very demanding, militant black student population, whereby the center and margin of sociology has been, in a sense, shaken about. And the disciplinary boundaries between sociology and others have been shaken about. Insofar as the confidence of sociology came through the study of the central institutions of modernity and problems, and anthropologists were people with pith helmets out there looking at the other. Now there's a shaking out of what is other. Everyone is other. And there is a sense of disquiet about the old boundaries and what they don't make sense in a lot of cases. So that is, which adds to the debate of who is this creature, the sociologist or the social scientist? What does she do at this stage in time? And it raises the issue of methodology, it raises the issue of efficacy, social and ideational efficacy. The third one is the issue of the agendas of research. It is frightening how things have narrowed down globally. In essence, the production of knowledge, it was alluded to in terms of the shrinking of publications. I can repeat the same pattern. South Africa, 3 publishers, social science, now 1. It is doubtful whether that publisher will survive another year. And the net that was supposed to set us free, in a sense, has created its own problems because of uneven technological developments and unequal accesses to those resources. And in the old days, there was a decrying of the fact that you had to go to London or Lisbon to become a sociologist or a social scientist. And now it's not London or Lisbon, but it's somewhere else. And it is supposed to be well funded, but we find out from our friends in Europe and America that they're also in a bit of a problem about the definition of what are the major research agendas of the late 20th century. That's all I have to say.
Thanks.
I go back to the
Your
concept of
publication.
crisis. Yeah. On the concept of crisis. I don't know. I mean, you can call it however you want, but what I'm interested in is that the transformation which occur always put on the desk of discussion the ways you are thinking on the reality you have to confront. Let me take the case I know something about, this, which is the Latin American one. We had a kind of paradigm, or let's say we had kind of 2 paradigms during, let's say, this time Emmanuel said 45 to 70. One was developmentalism. Developmentalism wasn't a simple imitation of the, let's say, Occidental, North American, European model of regulation accumulation. It was something more. Fernando Enrique Cardoso has written a very interesting article about this something more. He spoke from the originality of a copy. This is exactly what happened in Latin America. The developmentalism was an answer, a theoretical and also an ideological and political answer to what was going on in our societies before, during the time from, let's say, the late 20s to 45. And it was extremely important as a paradigm. It was extremely important not only for explaining ourselves, our society, but also for orienting public policies designed to promote economic and social development. The parallel paradigm, very important in the academic world, was the Marxist paradigm, which had quite a lot of expressions. There was the classical, let's say, Marxism, Leninism, Stalinism, Maoism, and Castrism. The other way around were different kinds of not so well-established Marxism, Gramsci, Althusser, Poulan, and so on. Darwin, so on. So, these paradigms at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, didn't work anymore. They didn't explain anymore the things we were experiencing. We were experiencing as societies and as social scientists. We are social scientists. We are part of the society. So what did we do? We began to look for a new paradigm. And the new paradigm, for a very short time, was the dependency approach. I don't speak about dependency theory, but about dependency approach. We can discuss that later. But anyway, dependency approach during a certain time, short time, gave us a new look on what was going on in Latin America and the Caribbean. And perhaps in the underdeveloped world, the dependent world, the periphery, and part of the semi-periphery. But dependency theory lost very quickly its explaining force. Very quickly is to say it became very important in 1970 to give. I'm not an historian, so I don't have to be too exact with the dates, but round about 1970 till round about 1978 to 1980, let's put it 1980. From then on, we had an ideological, but a real ideological offensive of neo-positivism in the epistemological sense of the word, neo-classical in the economic sense of the word, and neo-conservative offensive brought from the same structure which had been produced by the process of dependency. That is to say, it didn't come only from outside of our societies, that is from the center, from the score, from the United States, from Europe, but it came also from our own societies, from the inside of our own societies. So dependency theory, dependency approach broke down and couldn't explain anymore. We had, from the beginning of the 80s on, with this ideological, theoretical, epistemological, economic, sociological offensive, I don't know if I'm right.
That's right.
With the word of
No, that's right.
offensiva.
Yes, offensive.
Is offensive. We didn't find an answer. I think the community, the Latin American community, one of the best established communities of social scientists during a long part of this 45, 70, 75 time, we didn't know how to answer. We had no alternative. We are beginning